Tropical Storm Talim, a building typhoon threat for the coast of China. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 16th. Well, around the world, Calvin is on a weakening trend, slowly but surely. Don is still lingering around the Atlantic, and Talim is limbering up to become potentially a substantial typhoon threat for the southern parts of China. 29 storms have formed so far this year around the world. First, the Atlantic, day 46 of hurricane season, and Don is still subtropical and still barely holding on to gale force winds, 40 miles per hour and an estimated pressure of 1007 millibars. It's expected to turn right and then towards the south later on. We expect that movement will begin shortly. In the Eastern Pacific, of course, Calvin is still persisting. It's made a good go of it actually over the course of today. People thought it might have collapsed quite quickly, but it is holding on to Category 2 strength and a 10% area of interest in the far eastern Atlantic behind it. In the Western Pacific, Talim is obviously the main feature, which is quite a concern already, but we also have a 50% area of interest in the far south near Palau that could end up developing into a storm and head towards the Philippines next week. There is also two other areas of interest, 20% that's shooting off towards the north near eastern China, and a 10% for later on next week for the South China Sea. All of these systems could form. And in the North Indian Ocean, nothing of note over there, just some monsoonal rainfall at the current time. Satellite imagery in the last 24 hours, it is worth pointing out across the Indian region there, lots of rainfall, and Talim also a massive rainmaker, which it has been since its formative stages, and that will continue by the looks of things as it heads towards southern China. Well, this is the latest satellite imagery of Calvin. It is still the strongest storm out in the world today, and it's looking okay. It's not doing too badly. It's still got a decent eye structure, which at times has been opening up a little bit, and its structure in overall is looking okay. But the sea surface temperatures are still going to keep cooling pretty much all the way until it gets close to Hawaii, which, as you can see, is still some distance away, just near the edge of that frame now, as we look at the wider shot. Looking further east, the eastern part of the Pacific, not looking like there's much going on there yet, but we're looking out for a potential disturbance that might get itself going. Very little rotation on that imagery, and as we spin the world round and look over the Atlantic, a little wave there in the eastern Atlantic, and here of course is Don, and it doesn't look very good there, so we switch to the short wave and we can just about get a little bit of a better look towards the center of the system and actually pin it on the map, because we get to see the lower clouds a little bit better. It's around there, and it will start that eastward motion very soon. Well, sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific are still looking okay. Maybe they've degraded slightly in one or two spots, but still 30 degrees plus off the coast of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico and the western Atlantic is piping hot right now around the Bahamas and southern Florida, well over 30 to 32 degrees Celsius. And the Gulf Stream really looking good right now as well, it has to be said. Off the Outer Banks, still pushing close to 30 degrees Celsius there, and out over a large part of the Sargasso Sea, also looking good. Western Pacific has a big curtain of orange and red there, and extremely warm waters in the South China Sea, which is above average. The rest of the basin is around average at the moment, but the South China Sea is certainly going to produce a lot of energy, which will be absorbed by Tropical Storm Talim, and that's one of the reasons why it's producing so much rain. Bay of Bengal has been cooling just a little bit, still around 30 degrees Celsius. Arabian Sea, one or two little spots there of very warm waters amongst a whole region there where it's quite cool. Southwest Indian Ocean, of course, it's the off season now. Not particularly warm in the lower tropical zone there. And the Australian region, quite cool in comparison along the coast, and very few places now with 26 degrees Celsius waters along the coast of Australia. And for Fiji, it's just along the south coast there that's gone below 26 degrees now. South China Sea, as mentioned, above average. Western Pacific, real area there in the Philippine Sea, around average. Eastern Pacific, a little bit of area above average near Mexico. You can see a little bit of a line there from previous storms that has gone a little bit below average now, moving out to sea, and that big cool swathe further out. The Atlantic is very much above average in all of the tropical zone there, from the Gulf of Mexico through the Bahamas and then onto the Eastern Atlantic, 3 degrees above at least. Oceanic heat content is also good and steady in the Caribbean Sea, into the Gulf of Mexico and spilling out over the open Atlantic as well in a few spots. Gulf Stream really strong as well. Eastern Pacific looking good along the coast of Mexico. I think that's improved a little bit. And the Western Pacific also looking decent for large parts of the Philippine Sea, although I think those values may have degraded slightly near Luzon, which of course has been under the thumb of Talim. Computer models then. Here is Don moving towards the northeast within the next 12 hours and then southeast and then eventually southwards. It slowly decomposes as it continues that movement towards the south and southwest. It might have a second wind there near the end of that 5-day period before it starts to die off for good, and eventually it will continue southwestwards and it will be gone after that. We don't have any further imagery. It doesn't really seem worth it. Looking at the Eastern Pacific, there's Calvin. It will continue off towards the west-northwest, currently moving about 17 miles per hour, and it is still headed straight for the big island of Hawaii, which it just about makes it to. Around 50 miles per hour possibly is a maximum to expect there, and that next system forming behind it as well, possibly another hurricane on the way, but that is low chance at the minute. It's only the GFS that's really forecasting that. There's that system, Calvin, of course, moving through the Big Island and the rest of the Hawaiian Islands, possibly with tropical storm force winds. Western Pacific, here's Talim. There it is, moving west-northwest, and it strengthens quite dramatically just before landfall, probably a Category 2 peak, slight weakening before landfall, not far from the Leizhou Peninsula in southern China, and then moves inland. A small typhoon coming up after that, possibly there, before the end of that 5-day period. That other little system moving off the coast of China towards Korea doesn't look like it gets a tropical storm status. Then there's that potential typhoon in the Philippine Sea, and then maybe another very broad system that forms in the South China Sea there by day 5. So that could still be 4 active systems in that time period. Rainfall estimates are going to be very high in a few places as well, but thankfully for some places the forecast has gone down. Of course, some of that may be because rain has already fallen, but look at some of the hot spots over the next 7 days. That's this forecast. Possibly 13 inches on parts of Mindoro in the Philippines. That's over 300 millimeters. Maybe getting up to close to that level over there in southern China as well. Around Hong Kong, possibly 6 inches, 150 millimeters. Same for a few points of Taiwan. And maybe 16 inches inland in Vietnam from that next system that might form as well. Inland and extending into neighboring countries, Laos and possibly Cambodia. That's 400 millimeters. Into the longer range, you can take a look at what happens next. So 1 and 2 there, that Vietnam landfall, and then that second typhoon there that's moving towards the Philippines does a bit of a stalling motion actually, and then eventually a landfall in northern Luzon, possibly a Category 3 peak there, but it's still very difficult to forecast. The system obviously hasn't formed yet, but this is an idea of what we might expect late next week into the following week as we get to around that's the landfall there on the 24th, 25th of July. That's all the serious stuff done for now. You can take a look at the Force 13 merch store where we have all of our usual items and our full season and individual storm animations on request. Also, our Still Waiting for Hone t-shirt, and it still looks like there's plenty of time to get one because there's no sign of that dastardly storm just yet. Very long range, an enormous typhoon that pushes on towards the Hong Kong area just east of there possibly in that long range, and then another very large typhoon forming there in the Philippine Sea, an even stronger one that heads through the northern part of Luzon. Can't rule it out completely, but it is extremely long range and we can't say yes to any of this just yet. And behind that, a third system that ends up forming over there in the open waters that becomes also another enormous storm by the looks of things. Western Pacific really wants to push those out this year. Well, we'll see whether that happens or not. You can talk about all of that on our Discord server, discord.gg/force13 for tropical weather chat at any time with over 3,500 weather watchers from around the world. Well, on this day there was only one storm active in 2011, but it was a pretty mighty one in of itself. Typhoon Ma-on, which was peaking with winds of around 145 miles per hour, just short of super typhoon strength status, was pulling up towards the north there and was headed towards Japan, which I believe it struck without too much serious concerns. I can't quite remember actually, but that was a July storm that was certainly powerful at its peak intensity, which it achieved on this day 12 years ago. Slightly before my Force 13 tracking days, that one. In the Atlantic this year though, the next name on the list is Emily. In the Eastern Pacific it will be Dora, and in the Central Pacific of course it is still Hone. We're sick to death of saying it. Code red of course because of elevated demand, but Talim almost manages to do it on its own. Dokshuri is the next name on this season's list. In the North Indian Ocean it will be Tej. 29 storms so far, not counting Don because it's subtropical. We only count tropical storms on that tally down there. In the Australian region, the next name is Jasper. Southwest Indian Ocean will start this upcoming season with Alvaro, and the South Pacific will next see Lola. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.